this basically looking to 2030, there's some things we don't know, which is how political order will turn out, but things that are pretty much set in train: demographics, climate change, resource use, global economic growth. And if you look at that, it's very clear that there are two axes of choice. One is what will be the level of resource scarcity and climate change in the future, and how cooperative the world will be. And there's only one world, which is where we manage resource scarcity, climate change, demographic pressures cooperatively, where Europe survives. Because Europe will not survive in a world where great powers are scrambling over limited resources, where there's true interstate tension. And it's also the most vulnerable major industrial power to climate change, being surrounded by a large number of fragile states. So for Europe, it's not a choice. It's necessary that Europe by 2030 has founded an international order that is secure enough to drive that cooperation in a way that preserves a world fit for Europe, because otherwise Europe won't be fit for that world. Yes, I think we've seen the power of example of Europe, and particularly I'd say in China. The reason China has just taken some very major decisions to move to a low carbon economy is because of Europe's leadership. Some of that's diplomatic, but the majority of it was what we did at home and how we moved the agenda internationally. So that's been a good example of how being a pathfinder and leading by example is incredibly powerful in this interdependent world. The next big challenge is population stabilization. It's happening everywhere. The two leading countries are Russia and Japan, and I don't think anybody would say they were particularly good models. We're now seeing Europe, and after Europe it will be China. Now there are real discussions about whether the solution to this is to have more babies. Policies in France and policies in Shanghai are trying to promote higher birth rates. The world cannot take that as a solution. So in order to keep population within sustainable limits, we have to show, like we said, we can have economic growth and a low carbon economy, that we can have prosperity and a stable and declining workforce over time. And that is the next generation challenge for Europe. And Europe, I think, is very well placed to do that again, to show by example that you can maintain stability, prosperity, aspiration through a demographic transition. I think you're right, this is the real challenge. It's a challenge for politicians. I think sometimes people think it's a technical challenge. It's not. It's something Obama has done brilliantly in reframing the US's approach to the world. We haven't gotten Obama in Europe at the moment, and perhaps we have a more difficult problem, because we can't fall back on the easy patriotism of the nation state, because precisely that's what Europe is trying to weaken in order to improve global cooperation. But what we can't do is then look to our citizens as if we are selling out our values in order to compete in this world. It's very clear from European polling that Europeans value European leadership in promotion of values and prosperity and security, not just prosperity and security. So we need a narrative from politicians which lays out the values that Europe stands for and which it's trying to preserve, and also shows that Europe's actions in the world, which, as I say, are driven by domestic actions as much as anything, not just diplomacy, are making a real difference, are giving people some control over the future. Because when it comes down to it, European populations, like all other populations, feel disempowered. They don't feel they have control over this increasingly complex world. And we need to start showing them that we can make a difference. And you could say Europe has got some pretty good stories to tell on enlargement, on climate change, increasingly in areas like energy, on peacekeeping. There's a story to tell. The question is, whose job is it to tell it? And how is it told across Europe? And perhaps that's one of the roles of the president and the new foreign minister, to use the word Eurosceptics don't like, to drive forward, because building that sense will have a self-reinforcing support for Europe to invest in more bold policies, which will give it more success. Unless, though, we can credibly show we're making a difference, we will carry on having this decline in support as people retreat into a defensive posture in a world they feel ever more complex and hostile to them.